DCEU is over. Soon, James Gunn will be launching the DCU. So today we're going to stop and rank all 49 MCU and DCEU films from the worst to the best one final time. In last Justice League, I've said it many times before, but I think this movie is a gross abomination where Warner Brothers tried to use a family tragedy as an opportunity to take over a Zack Snyder film and turn it into something else, where they started out trying to make this big, massive epic, and then they tried to make the Reader's Digest version by having Joss Whedon come in, write some stupid jokes.
He said that you were the thirstiest young woman he ever met. Hungriest.
And I thought my jokes were bad.
Condense everything, and it just turns it into this bizarre Frankenstein monster of a film. 48 Suicide Squad, another monstrosity from the Warner Brothers regime from 8 years back. David Ayer set out to make one movie. That's what he wrote. That's what he shot. And then Deadpool came out. It was this gigantic hit. And all of a sudden, all these executives got the idea, what if we turn Suicide Squad into Deadpool?
Deadpool opened. We're going to turn David Ayer's dark, soulful movie into a comedy now.
And they changed out the score with all these rock songs. They re-edited the film, they reshot the film, and turned it into this bizarre mishmash of ideas that feels like it was directed by committee, because essentially it was.
And the thing is, I have it. I have a copy of it, right? Because everyone I've shown the cut has the same reaction. Rage. This is the movie we wanted. Why didn't we get this?
Next, Thor Love and Thunder. On paper, this should have been a fantastic follow-up to Ragnarok, where we're tackling the theological problem of evil with Thor, dealing with life and death. We're bringing in comic book movie legend Christian Bale. But while it tackles really important issues, it does so in a movie that takes absolutely nothing seriously. Everything is a joke, and so it's blatantly at odds with itself when it wants to tackle cancer, faith, doubt, but it can't stop making silly base level jokes, and it just undercuts the entire movie. Who can say whether 46 Wonder Woman 1984. Now, I enjoyed this movie enough when I saw it in December of 2020 because we didn't get a lot of blockbusters that year, and we didn't get to go to the theater many times that year. But it's a film that the longer I reflect on it, and every time I rewatch it, I realize it simply does not work on a narrative level. It has some scenes and moments and ideas that can arouse some big emotions in you. However, if you stop and think about what's going on, it is just plot hole after plot hole after plot hole. It's far too long. It makes no sense. And there's some plot points in here that are offensive if you do think about them. 45, Thor the Dark World, the MCU at its most mediocre. Now, there were good ideas on the table in the development process for this film. They hired Patty Jenkins. She wanted to do like Space Romeo and Juliet. And then the writers wanted Hela as the villain. And then the wackos in these committees in New York City were like, nah, Hela won't sell enough toys. These aren't good ideas.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
So they cranked out this bland film that has movie stars being charismatic. It has jokes like it's supposed to. It has action set pieces, but it's so utterly safe that it's totally forgettable. Real quick, today's video is brought to you by Magic Spoon. Growing up, I loved cereal. I'd eat cereal with milk in the morning, and then I'd eat cereal straight out of the box in the afternoon. But as I get older, I don't like the sugar and the empty carbs so much. Magic Spoon is a cereal that's high protein, zero sugar, and that's keto friendly, gluten-free, grain-free, and soy-free. They offer a variety pack that has 4 flavors: cocoa, fruity, frosted, and peanut butter. This pack has 0 grams of sugar, 13 to 14 grams of protein, and 4 to 5 grams of net carbs, and only 140 calories per serving. In my house for the last 2 years, we've always kept Magic Spoon in the pantry. My favorite flavor is actually to mix cocoa and peanut butter together, and I'll just eat it as a snack while I watch movies. Go to magicspoon.com/Sean Chandler to grab a variety pack and try it today. And be sure to use promo code Sean Chandler at checkout to save $5 off your order. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed by a 100% happiness guarantee. So if you don't like it for any reason, you will get a 100% refund, no questions asked. Remember to start the new year off right with a delicious bowl of high-protein cereal at magicspoon.com/Sean Chandler and use code Sean Chandler to save $5. Thank you, Magic Spoon, for sponsoring today's video. And let's get back to it. Next, Eternals, a movie that just collapses under the weight of its ambition. It's simply a film trying to do too much. It's introducing 10 characters while doing a get the band back together story, while covering thousands of years of history, building out all of this lore, while trying to tackle some philosophical questions and explore the idea of humanity and is it worth saving and what makes mankind beautiful, while also having all of the demands of being a big Marvel blockbuster, and it can't sustain all of that in a single film. I think this one would have worked a lot better as a TV show. I respect the ambition, but I don't think it works. 43, Captain Marvel. Now, this movie isn't without its charm. It's nice to see the world of the MCU in the 90s. It's fun to see Nick Fury before he became cynical and jaded and knew all the stuff going on. But it is a clunky, awkward story that always feels like it has our lead character at arm's length because she has amnesia and everyone is constantly telling her who she is. And so it just makes for a very strange experience, like they never quite got a hold of what they were trying to do with the movie.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
42, The Marvels. This is an incredibly frustrating film because it can be superficially fun and charming, but it is such a mess on a story and storytelling level.
This is a mess. None of these storylines make any sense.
Where it feels like big chunks of the movie are just missing and the audience is left to fill in all the gaps. You can feel all the ways that the movie was reworked in editing and then duct taped together with reshoots. And it's just frustrating that they would put out a movie like this far into the MCU. This is the sort of movie that we expect from those Sony spin-off films, not from the MCU. 41, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, another superficially entertaining MCU film with plenty of little jokes, plenty of action set pieces, but a film that just feels directed by committee, where they didn't trust a writer and a director to tell a story. They just kept fiddling with it and changing it.
And then I think they did want the opportunity to change some stuff. And so they just want that freedom.
So much so that according to reports, they were changing the end of the film a month before release.
They do rework stuff.
And you feel that. There's no stakes, there's no weight to it, there's nothing distinctive. They've turned Ant-Man into just another generic MCU film.
Do you know what's strange? Is the script reads much more straightforward than the film itself. When I saw the film, I was like, this is, like you said, this is bananas.
40, Iron Man 2. This feels like a good director and a great cast doing the best they can with a microwaved script and a rushed production. It's well documented. Jon Favreau wanted 3 years to make the film, but he only got 2. And therefore, their script wasn't as refined as it needed to be. The story is clunky with too much stuff crammed into it. And they didn't have as much time on set to kind of let the improvisation happen organically. And so you get a movie that has some great sequences and moments, but as a whole is a big drop in quality from the first film. Next, Shazam! Fury of the Gods. And this just feels like another generic comic book movie blockbuster that checks all the right boxes. You have action, you have jokes, you have lore, and you have superheroes in capes, punching villains in capes. It has everything it's supposed to have, except a unique personality.
I just threw a truck at a dragon. I love my life.
The first Shazam had it being big as a superhero movie, but this movie ages up Billy just enough that it loses that, and so it doesn't have anything distinct about it. It's fine, it's totally watchable, but it's not memorable.
You are very menacing. I just want you to know that.
38, Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I know a lot of you love this movie, and you see this placement, and you want to just yell at me.
This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
But the thing is, I just don't think the plot adds up, and that does take me out of the movie repeatedly. The idea that Tony Stark would leave his military-grade glasses without instructions to a high schooler who's been dead for 5 years doesn't make any sense.
No, don't like that.
Mysterio's plot to become the top world superhero doesn't make any sense. There's a scene in the movie where a grown woman goes to a high school boy and says, "Take off your clothes in front of me."
Take off your clothes.
Okay.
That doesn't make any sense. I love these characters. Scenes are fun. The Mysterio effect stuff, great sequence, but the plot does not make sense. 37, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. For a long time, I had this movie very low on my MCU rankings, and I've slowly started to come around to it over the last 2 years, partially because of the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special and Guardians 3 helping smooth out some of my issues with this film, but also when you see utterly soulless MCU films that just feel like they were cranked out of a factory, this movie feels like a film with a soul created by a storyteller with a vision for these characters that he was trying to communicate. Now, I still have issues with the structure of the film, the tone of the film. It has too much of a mean streak.
I am hideous?
You are horrifying to look at, yes.
So I'm still not crazy about it, but I enjoy it significantly more now than I did just a few years back. 36, The Incredible Hulk, and I would say this is one of the most overhated films in the MCU. A lot of people have it at the bottom of their ranking, and I've never really understood that. Maybe it's because I watched a lot of the Bill Bixby, Lou Ferrigno Hulk show growing up. And maybe it's simply because this one has a different vibe to it. It's the one that was distributed by Universal and has just a different feel to it. But I think it has cool Hulk action to it. I like Edward Norton in the role. And so the movie overall works for me. It's not great. It's not super high on my list, but I don't think it deserves a lot of the hate it gets. 35, Black Adam. Now, I know a lot of people like to dunk on this film, but I enjoyed it for the most part. It's definitely fairly generic, with once again a city being threatened and CGI characters flying through a city, fighting each other, sky beams, all that stuff we've seen before. And it definitely feels like a comic book movie that would have come out like 15 years ago, probably because they'd been developing the script with The Rock in mind for 15 years. Here I am! But I still had fun with it. I liked the nature of the Black Adam being more of an anti-hero and the Justice Society coming in. It was fun. Next, Thor, one of the Phase 1 MCU films where you can feel them trying to figure out how do you have a shared universe where you have the cosmic as well as the earthly and make them feel believable, like they exist in the same space. And there's some growing pains here, but a lot of great stuff came out of this movie. I love the way that it blended Asgardian Shakespearean grandeur with kind of the fish out of water humor. What? The casting here is great, where they're bringing in both legacy actors as well as in newcomers like Hemsworth and Hiddleston. But the story is structured in an odd way where the hero and villain plots feel very detached from each other until the final showdown. And so it lacks kind of urgency and forward momentum on a plot level.
I like it.
I know, it's great, right?
Another!
33, Black Widow, the long-lost Phase 3 MCU film that they decided to use to kick off Phase 4 after Black Widow had already died, which was a bizarre choice. If you put all that aside, I enjoy the film as kind of a spy story in the MCU where you're diving into a particular family dynamic of sorts, and seeing how the characters went off in different directions, how they come back together. There's some real standouts in here with Yelena.
This thing that you do when you whip your hair when you're fighting. It's a fighting pose. You're a total poser.
Not a poser.
As well as Red Guardian. Certain action sequences I really enjoyed. I think the Taskmaster twist was ill-conceived. It gets very cartoonish and video gamey in the third act.
Like Black Widow, the entire third act was reworked as we were shooting, and which is incredible. And so they just want that freedom.
But I enjoy it more than most. Then we have Blue Beetle, a late DCEU film, which had a very interesting blend of doing fresh new things while also borrowing heavily from many other comic book films of the past. The thing that really helps it out was the family dynamic, where Jaime's family aren't just tagging along, they are pivotal to his life, they're pivotal to this story and the adventure and everything taking place. But also, when you look at it, it's very reminiscent of Iron Man and Ant-Man in multiple different ways. And so it does have a freshness to it, just not the plot.
Host acquired.
Who said that?
Systems checking. 3,
Okay,
2.
it's gonna be okay.
31, Doctor Strange, another frustrating one in here because it has the most creative visuals in the entire MCU, where we're taking Inception and Dark World imagery and cranking up to this whole other level, and you're seeing things we have never seen before in a film. But on a story level, it feels like they're just trying to cram Doctor Strange into the MCU origin movie template. So it has so much creativity in one sense, and it's so formulaic in another. Bringing us into the top 30, Iron Man 3, another MCU film that I feel is dramatically overhated. Now, if you want to criticize the film for the plot twist, I gotcha.
So I made a decision, and it was wrong. It was a bad call, Ripley.
They decided to be subversive, and they took away a more interesting villain for a less interesting villain and some cheap poop jokes. If you don't like that, fair enough. Aside from that, it's a solid Tony Stark movie where Shane Black's writing fits his character nicely. The action sequences are memorable, interesting, and different from one another. And so, besides Shane Black being a little bit too clever for his own good, this is a solid MCU film. 29, Birds of Prey and the incredibly long title, or simply Harley Quinn. This is another one where I enjoy it significantly more than most people. I enjoyed it as kind of like a street-level DC film that has kind of a Guy Ritchie flair to it, with Harley as this unreliable narrator. At least one of the action sequences is very cool. Some of the other ones, not so much, but I liked that it was much smaller scale in what it was doing. I thought it was high energy, and I had fun with it, and it has Harley Quinn doing cocaine.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
Then we have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, another one that I think I enjoy more than a lot of other people. A big part of that is because Sam Raimi,
Groovy.
In particular, Evil Dead Sam Raimi, was so pivotal in kind of me getting into movies, and then he went on to do the Spider-Man films. And so him bringing his weirdness and his aesthetics to Doctor Strange, I have a lot of fun with that. There's some problems here in the story. You can feel the reshoots. Half of it feels directed by Raimi, half of it feels directed by a committee. But there's enough here that worked for me that I enjoyed it.
Then Doctor Strange, like, we know those films often are fluid, and it seems like this one was a bit fluid. Like,
so fluid. I there's a point in making the movie where I just stopped reading drafts. I was like, this is just gonna change again.
Was everybody there when you shot your stuff?
No. So it was weird.
So did you even know which characters were going to end up in that finished scene? Like,
I didn't.
I did my voiceover work to make everything that I'd already done on camera make sense. That's how we did Doctor Strange. That one was a wild ride.
27, Ant-Man and the Wasp. I know a lot of people were disappointed by this film because it just felt inconsequential, coming right after Infinity War. But that's kind of exactly what I liked about it. It was unassuming, intentionally small scale. It's a MacGuffin story, and it's meant to be lighthearted fun. And I like having that change of pace in the MCU where not everything is meant to be massive in scope and size. And so this, for me, is not trying to be a home run. It's just trying to be a double. And that's what it was. I know some of you are anticipating some ant puns. I can't think of any at the moment. Next, Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the final DCEU film, and I think that's one of the biggest things working against it. It wasn't meant to be the finale. It was just meant to be the next Aquaman film. And as the next Aquaman film, I think it delivers more of what people enjoyed about the first film. Globe-trotting, the royalty politics, and then the big plus on this one, Aquaman and Orm doing their buddy adventure together. All that stuff worked for me. But as a finale, it doesn't satisfy, doesn't feel like it should be the end because it wasn't meant to be. 25, Avengers Age of Ultron. This is a tricky one because I feel like the highs, the moments, the jokes, the action set pieces are just as good as the first Avengers, but I don't feel the film is as effective on the whole. And I think some of that is that the story just has too many moving parts. And so I never connect with it quite the same way as I do with the first one. Feel like the director is too far ahead of the audience for too much of the movie, where we need more information to be following along with everything happening. So for me, this is the most confusing film in the MCU. 24, Ant-Man, one of the great what-ifs of the MCU, because Edgar Wright was supposed to make this movie for like 10 years, and it kept getting delayed and postponed, and eventually the committee people up here ran off Edgar Wright, and so we got more of kind of a company man to come in and make the film, and I like it for what it is. It's charming, and you get Paul Rudd as a superhero. You get Michael Douglas also as a superhero. It's a heist movie. I enjoy all of that about this film, but you just wonder what could have been if we'd gotten Edgar Wright's Ant-Man. I know some of you are getting antsy, waiting for some of my pleasant ant puns, but that wasn't in the cards for today.
Ants. Ants.
23, Aquaman, the highest grossing DC film of all time. It is a very silly film at times. James Wan just wants to entertain, and it feels like he throws everything at the audience. And so we have this massive story about brothers competing for the throne. It's globe-trotting, it's got action, it's got all sorts of sea creatures, silly jokes, complicated jokes, lore, all of it. And does all of it work? Not necessarily. Does enough of it work? Absolutely. I have a lot of fun with this film, and it's a more emotionally resonant than I think people give it credit for. 22, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, the MCU film that without question was dealt the absolute worst hand for the obvious reason that they were very far into development, scripts written, and then the star of the movie tragically died. And they had to rework the film, and this was all in the COVID era. And given everything that went on behind the scenes, I think the movie is remarkably coherent, and they found a way to bring an emotional weight to the film in light of all of that. But I think that's also one of the things that works against the film because it is so weighty on an emotional level. It feels like you're attending a funeral when you watch this film. So I think it largely works, but it doesn't have a lot of rewatchability. 21, Shazam, big as a superhero movie, and that just makes it pop and stand out. Zachary Levi is so good at playing a man-child.
I'd like to purchase some of your finest beer, please.
And doing that in the context of a superhero story is just something fresh, new, and different that we haven't seen before. But the real surprise here, it's a movie that is surprisingly heartfelt. It's all about family. There's parts of it that are gut-wrenching, but then when you come together at the end of the film, it's very satisfying and emotional. So a film that works on a bunch of levels I wasn't expecting. Kicking off our top 20, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, an MCU film bringing in a bunch of influence from Hong Kong cinema, whether you're talking about the Jackie Chan influences on the bus fight or the Yuan Wu Ping wire fu choreography of the beginning of the film. It's just cool to see that in an MCU film. You get one of the best villains in the MCU. I think a couple of times the requirements of being an MCU film hurt it a little bit. There's some forced humor in the third act, but otherwise, one of the stronger MCU films of Phase 4. 19, Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition. I don't watch the theatrical cut, so I'm sure it would be much lower on this list, but this is a film that I've always been drawn to it. Maybe it's the simple fact that it has Batman and Superman, but it's a movie that actually tried to tackle ideas, tell a complex, layered story. It's overly ambitious. Some of that leads to a convoluted, messy plot. But as much as I can see the flaws in it, some of that doesn't matter to me. It's still a film I thoroughly enjoy, respect, and constantly find myself going back to.
Was there a rush to kind of throw too many characters in there?
So. I think so. And I just think, I know the pressure that we were getting from Warner Brothers was just, we need our MCU. I was one of the people that was just saying, whoa, let's not run before we walk. Like, hold on. Like, they were very methodical in the way we built it. We just can't jump, into all of these things.
18, Captain America, the First Avenger. I absolutely adore the first hour of this film where we see the Captain America origin story, and you have this very altruistic hero in Steve Rogers who truly wants to do the right thing. It's classic heroism, a person of traditional nobility, and adding to that just the aesthetics that they brought to it, the fantastic Alan Silvestri score. There's so much to love here. I don't think the back half is as strong as the first half, but still a great Phase 1 MCU film. Next, Thor Ragnarok. Here, Taika Waititi reinvents the Thor franchise, throwing in boundless energy, a vibrant color scheme, a snazzy new score, and just easily made the best Thor film that we have had thus far. Yes! It's funny. It takes full advantage of Chris Hemsworth's impeccable comedic timing. It tells a story that still has emotional resonance to it. You remember all these quotable lines. And so this was just the right Thor movie at the right time. I wish Waititi could have held himself back in a couple of sequences or handled a couple things differently. Otherwise, great film.
Because that's what heroes do.
16, The Suicide Squad. Mickey Mouse briefly fired James Gunn, so DC snatched him up, and the project he wanted to do, The Suicide Squad, which I think is a very nice pairing. He's really good at pulling together these weird teams that kind of form a family together and taking bizarre characters and finding the humanity in them. Taking characters that seem very evil and calloused and bringing heart and humanity to them. And that's all throughout this film. Also, he found a fresh new angle on the comic book movie genre by bringing in influences from like the Dirty Dozen and old war films. And so you just got something funny, because he's a funny guy, but also fresh. Next, The Flash, a movie that was dramatically more polarizing than I was expecting after I saw the film. I found it to be very funny, but also deeply emotionally resonant while pulling at all of my nostalgia strings at the same time. Now, I've been a part of the discourse on the internet. I understand where a lot of you are coming from. Of course, the VFX aren't very good. But for me, as someone who lost a parent when I was only 20 years old, a story about a son trying to reconnect with a parent that he lost when he was a child, it hits all the right notes for me. The movie ends on a satisfying emotional note. And when you care deeply about the emotional current of a film, stuff like VFX, you can forgive it. Because that story and current is what matters most, and that was my experience with the film. 14, Black Panther, one of the more mature films in the MCU that tells a story that's kind of pulling from a bunch of Shakespearean influences where you have family members competing to see who will sit on the throne. It touches on modern ideas, but it doesn't do it through lecturing. It does it through story, where you have a villain who is very much a villain and always is seen as a villain, but there is a kernel of truth in what he's saying that moves and changes our hero as well as the nation, that makes for a very well-rounded story that has something to say and tells it through story. 13, Spider-Man Homecoming. I find this to be one of the most rewatchable movies in the MCU. Of course, Spider-Man is just such a likable character, but in the case of this movie, they really leaned into the idea of him being a high school superhero.
Hey Karen, what else can this suit do? What?
So he's immature. He has field trips, and it uses Tony Stark as a mentor to him. And so it just finds some way to take a character we've seen a lot and do something new with him. Take Spider-Man, who we've seen in many previous films, and put him in a different context. And all of this, as we started getting into the MCU's third phase and over 15 movies in, and they still had new things to do with the MCU, with these characters. I think there's a great villain. It's a different type of a villain threat. So very enjoyable.
You're that Spider guy on YouTube, right? Call me Spider-Man! Okay, Spider-Man!
Next, Captain America, The Winter Soldier, another one of the more mature films in the MCU. In the case of this one, bringing in some political intrigue into the mix, where Captain America, by his nature, came from a simpler time where there was a lot more trust in institutions. He's a more pure and noble, black and white kind of morality to him. And so you take that character and drop him into this very complex gray world where governmental institutes aren't trustworthy. He doesn't know who to turn to in this scenario. And it's that combination of his simple morality in a complex world that just makes for the right tension. Add to that all of these great action sequences with practical effects, and you get one of the best MCU films. 11, Wonder Woman, a movie that I had no idea how they could bring to the big screen. They tried it in the past. Joss Whedon couldn't crack the code. They did a pilot episode of a TV show that utterly failed. And then Patty Jenkins and Zack Snyder and the DC crew at that time somehow cracked the code. In a window of time where Warner Brothers was screwing up all of the projects by micromanaging them, somehow Patty Jenkins snuck by and delivered a great Wonder Woman film that has thrilling action. It's in a unique context by putting it in World War I, a war that we don't go to as much in film. And it's a movie that has something to say about man's inhumanity to man. That's even part of our lead character's journeys, understanding all of that. And they make Wonder Woman strong, but she's still feminine. It's funny. It's romantic. Does get too talky in the finale and gets too CGI-y in the finale. Otherwise, amazing film. Bringing us into the top 10, Spider-Man No Way Home. And on a simple script and story level, I think this movie has some issues and could use some work.
Brilliant but lazy.
But as a gift to Spider-Man fans, this film was a special moment and event where they found a way to do this multiverse story and bring all these Spider-Men that mean so much to us and their villains all together. And it felt right. It was satisfying. This to me is an example of how you can have a movie that has some elements that like, that really doesn't work. That's not very well thought through. Like, what's even going on with the spell at the end of the movie? But none of it matters because it delivered what I bought a ticket to get. Spider-Man magic. Spider-Man multiverse. You got that right. And so I was happy. And so were a whole lot of other people opening night.
It was so crazy in there, like literally like everyone was standing up and screaming.
I know, my voice is gone. I was clapping, screaming.
There's a bunch of parts where people are like, whoa!
Number 9, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, an MCU Phase 5 film that feels an awful like an MCU Phase 3 film. Probably because James Gunn wrote it 5 years before the movie actually came out, and he said he changed very little about the film from when he first wrote it to when it finally came out in theaters. And it was just so pleasing that he got it right. That it was heartfelt, it was tragic, it was funny, and it felt like a proper send-off for my favorite ragtag group in the MCU.
Analogy. Is it? Metaphor.
8, The Avengers. 10 plus years removed, it's easy to forget how big of a deal it was when this movie came out. Comic book team-up movies weren't really a thing prior to the Avengers. They've become common now, but it wasn't exactly clear how you take very earthbound characters like Tony Stark and put them in a franchise with a god from space. And Joss Whedon and Kevin Feige cracked the code. The story's very straightforward, and that allows for plenty of room for action set pieces and quips and banter.
I care how you speak, and he's my brother.
He killed 80 people in 2 days.
He's adopted.
And because it was the first time we'd ever done it, it was okay that it wasn't the most complex narratively speaking, because it was special that they just did it. And there's just something so straightforward about all of it that you can only really do one time and have it work this good. And it did work really, really good. Number 7, Man of Steel, the film that kicked off the DCEU, but it wasn't really intended to kick off a universe. It's an idea that came about during the development of The Dark Knight Rises while Nolan and Goyer were writing the script. They had some writer's block.
The legend is that Man of Steel came out of writer's block on Dark Knight Rises.
That's true.
And in that writer's block, the idea for Man of Steel came to them. Nolan didn't want to direct it, so he gave it to Zack Snyder to run with it.
My friend Christopher Nolan called me and said, would you have any interest in making a Superman movie? David Goyer and I wrote a Superman script, and I don't think I want to do it.
And for me, this is a film that I respect it, enjoy it more every single time I watch it. When I first watched it, it was a little bit tough for me to process because I grew up on the Christopher Reeve Superman films, and that's such a distinct interpretation, vibe, aesthetic. And Snyder has his own strong voice and flavor that he brings to things. Likewise, it's a story that Nolan worked on, so it has his non-linear elements to it. So it's so different. But the more I've watched, the more I've taken it on its own terms. I just enjoyed what Zack Snyder brought to it, the way that it celebrates the character, but in a very different way from normal, the action, and the fantastic score. Love it. Next up, Captain America Civil War. And what I love about this film is that they were able to build off of all of these different franchises, all of these different events that happened in the MCU to create a scenario where you can believe that Tony and Steve would be very much at odds over what was about to take place. So much so that audiences still are debating who was right and side with different people in everything that took place in the movie. And that's because it felt earned. They built off what came before. We'd spent a lot of time with these characters understanding who they are and what makes them tick. So when they come to head over their values and their experiences that have led them to this moment, you believe it. Add to that, you get the airport fight sequence, but then you also get a very personal fight at the end of the film. And I think this is one of the movies that just shows what the first 3 phases of the MCU did so well, where we spent a lot of time with our lead characters, and you could do things like this film and it would work and it would feel earned. Real quick, before I give you my top 5, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking if you're up for the challenge. How do you rank all 49 MCU and DCEU films together. Also, coming up in just a few weeks, I'm heading off to Orlando, Florida for MegaCon with a bunch of my YouTube friends. We're going to be doing panels across all 4 days of MegaCon. We're doing meet and greets. If you're anywhere in Florida, the United States, planet Earth, the Milky Way galaxy, or the multiverse, you want to be at MegaCon, it's going to be a blast. Details are down below in the description. Number 5, Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember when they announced that they were doing this movie, and the director of Super, who previously wrote the Scooby-Doo movies, was going to be writing and directing it. I thought Kevin Feige had lost his mind.
What a bunch of a-holes.
It was their biggest gamble, and it seemed like a crazy gamble. Like, wait, you're putting the 5th build character on a sitcom in the lead of your movie? What are you doing? Then they put out the first trailer, and I went, that actually looks really good. And I went to see the movie, and the movie was even better than I thought the trailers were. It's so heartfelt, it's so clever, and James Gunn put together this set of characters that you absolutely adore. And so whatever happens to them, you feel it. Adding to that, you have a fantastic soundtrack, and you just get one of the most heartfelt and personal films in the entire MCU.
Said it yourself, bitch. We're the Guardians of the Galaxy.
Number 4, Iron Man. The first MCU film is still one of the best, and I think one of the simple reasons for that is that it didn't have the weight of the rest of the MCU on its shoulders. It didn't need to set up the next film. It didn't need to follow up 7 films. It just got to be a story about Tony Stark. And it's a classic hero's journey, but it's also filled with like all these personal moments. It sets up this incredible character arc that would play out over the next 10 years.
I shouldn't be alive unless it was for a reason.
You're not the guy to make the sacrifice play.
It just, you could feel the cast, the writers, the director, everyone was so passionate about the film and heading in the same direction. They knew what they were working towards, and they made something special that changed the comic book movie genre forever.
Oh, and that tone that you and Robert discovered on that movie, I would say became the template in a way.
But that tone of a little bit of a fun, a little bit of a subversiveness, but then also a heart and an earnestness too.
In third place, Avengers Endgame. If ever there was a movie that deserved to be called epic, it's Avengers Endgame. They found a way to have a satisfying conclusion to the Infinity Saga that celebrates our original Avengers. It shows how each of them would respond to loss. It has some great jokes in it. It pays tribute and reminds us of the journey that we've been on, and it all culminates in one of the most satisfying third act battles I have ever seen. It's filled with fan service that feels earned. Like we built up to these little moments, and if that had been the end of the MCU, we all would have gone, you ended on a high note. You did it. Well done. And then they decided to keep going. Our runner-up, Zack Snyder's Justice League, a version of the film that is better on every single level than Justice League. Every change that they made for Justice League made it worse. Here, you get this highly detailed superhero, once again, epic, that sets up all of these little character arcs, all of these little plot points, where everything is developed and elaborated on, so when you get to the payoff, when you get to the finale, when you get to the culmination of a subplot, all of it is so satisfying and it feels earned. As you're watching sequences, you start piecing together how the elements all converge into this moment, into this line of dialogue, into this payoff, and it's so satisfying and so confusing as to why Warner Brothers would butcher this into Justice League.
I don't care how many demons he's fought and how many hells. He's never fought us. Got us united.
But coming in at number 1, Avengers Infinity War. For me, this is the comic book movie magnum opus, where they took all of my toys and they put them in one movie, and they made it actually so enjoyable and satisfying. Whether you're talking about all of these characters finally meeting for the first time and having all the fun banter between them.
I'm Peter, by the way.
Doctor Strange.
Oh, you're using your made-up names. I'm Spider-Man then.
Whether you're talking about a movie that had some bite to it and allowed the villain to win, or of course the simple fact that the movie kind of treats the villain as the lead character. He's the person that kind of is on the journey, and we learn about him, and he's given this arc, so you understand where he's coming from. You understand the toll that all of this takes on him, and so it just has everything that I want from a comic book movie. It was such a potent experience to watch it, and so it comes in at number 1. Remember, if you want that delicious cereal that's high in protein and without the sugar, check out Magic Spoon at the link in the description. Remember, if you're in Florida, I will be at MegaCon February 1st through the 4th with a bunch of my YouTube friends. All of you, thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.